Our long national nightmare is finally over, and IndyCar racing returns this weekend with the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. Got a ton of content on the way, but of course, we have to clean up some of the things that were brought forward towards the end of last week. Because while I was in New York City attending the Hyundai Drivers Camp, where I learned a ton about fitness, you're going to see more about that during my coverage of the 12 hours of Sebring. But there were several articles that broke towards the end of last week in regards to IndyCar, regards to sponsorship, regards to the supposedly upcoming new formula for chassis and engines, though it seems like it's getting pushed further and further back, which is concerning. And I want to talk about all of it in this video before we launch into this week, which is going to be very, very much focused on the present day in IndyCar. And the present day in IndyCar is focused on Fox Sports and St. Petersburg. So let's take a look at what my content schedule is going to look like for this week. And we're going to be starting it off after this video on Tuesday with our second episode of Unverified. Both myself and Tony Donahue, producer Kyle, going to be in the studio and doing that for you guys live Tuesday at 8 p.m. Then we're going to head over to the DL 500 Club on Wednesday. Same bat time, different bat place on the DL 500 Club at 8 p.m. Then on Thursday, I'm going to have an IndyCar preview where I'm going to go through each of the cars and drivers of this year's IndyCar series and kind of break them down and kind of give you a preview of what to expect from each of them and perhaps some of their expectations. Then we're going to be doing something a little bit different coverage-wise for an IndyCar weekend. Friday at 2:50 p.m. Eastern Time, about 10 minutes before they go live, I am going to be doing a live reaction to Fox Sports' return to IndyCar racing coverage, and the first time they've covered the, I guess we'll call it the Indy Racing League version of IndyCar. First practice one at 3 p.m. Eastern goes off, and we're going to see all of the graphics and Fox Sports' presentation of IndyCar racing. Looking forward to that. That's going to be live and free on this YouTube channel. You don't need any other subscription, nothing to watch that. It'll just be me sitting in front of the camera, probably with timing and scoring playing in the background, and I'm just going to tell you what I think of Fox Sports' first IndyCar broadcast. Then on Saturday, we're going to go back to the DL 500 Club, starting at 2:20 p.m. Eastern, and I'm going to give my reactions to qualifications for the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. We're going to be talking, of course, mostly about the Fox Sports broadcast, but obviously I'm going to be talking about what's happening on the racetrack as well. And then on Sunday at 11:50 a.m. Eastern for a high noon race start, it's going to be my live reactions to the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg, the first race broadcast for Fox. That also going to be on the DL 500 Club. And then on Monday, it'll be live and free on YouTube. It'll be my review of the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. You guys know what to expect from those sorts of videos. So let's talk about some of the breaking news that went off towards the end of last week. And anytime you get news on a Friday, it typically means people are trying to bury that news, and this was no exception. But at the end of the day, well, the internet waits for no one, and the internet is forever, and we can talk about stuff when it isn't necessarily right now, right this second, breaking news. This article comes from Forbes, written by Bruce Martin, and it is a confirmation of something we feared would happen, and it has now happened, which is that this year's IndyCar race at Iowa Speedway will no longer have Hy-Vee as the title sponsor, although they are remaining on board as a race sponsor, which is quite interesting. But obviously, their presence in IndyCar significantly reduced. You've probably already been aware that they left Rahal Letterman Lanigan as a team sponsor. Now they're leaving as the title sponsor of the Hy-Vee IndyCar race weekend, which I guess we're not calling it that anymore. And we've got some more Hy-Vee news here in just a second, but I think it's important to note that this means that the big festival and the big concert and all of that stuff, that's all gone from Iowa Speedway now. It is now just a race, which to me, well, that's why I go to Iowa Speedway. But it's very important to note that A lot of people were coming because that race was attached to a big name concert. I mean, you had Post Malone, you had Carrie Underwood, you had Ed Sheeran. These were some huge names in the music industry that now IndyCar can no longer piggyback off of. So that's going to be really a tough sell for Iowa Speedway, for Penske Entertainment as the promoter of this event. Makes me worried. There's no doubt about it. And the racing product last year made me worried. Now you don't have the entertainment product attached to the racing product, which the racing product suffered. The good news is, according to Bruce Martin, the ticket prices will be significantly reduced. So I guess there's a positive there. I guess we're going to find out how many people were deterred from going to Iowa Speedway because the ticket prices were so high. If that was indeed a huge problem, then maybe the crowd size is going to be similar or perhaps a little bit above what it was the past few years. And I would say if you've got a dedicated racing audience that is the same or bigger than what you got with the concerts, I'd say that's probably a net gain, quite honestly. Of course, that's me looking at it very positively. We hate to see Hy-Vee step back because they were such a great sponsor for so long in IndyCar racing. Very, very disappointing to lose them this early. And speaking of losing Hy-Vee as a title sponsor, we knew that they were not returning as the title sponsor in Milwaukee already, but breaking news if you didn't already know that. The good news with Milwaukee is that they have secured a new title sponsor, and that's Snap-on. Now, important to note, Snap-on is one of the many Penske Entertainment affiliated sponsors that were already kind of in the wheelhouse, already kind of there, able to come in at a moment's notice to sponsor events. I mean, you just look at some of these events down here, or some of these sponsors down here. Many of them, you'll notice, are affiliated with Penske or Team Penske somewhere on one of their race cars, right? And so Snap-on's one of those companies. But I will say this: Snap-on, Wisconsin-based. That's great to have a Wisconsin company sponsoring and stepping up to sponsor the Milwaukee race, which I thought was one of the best two race combinations we had last year. Quite honestly, I wish we'd make Milwaukee the doubleheader and give Iowa just one race instead of having Iowa be the two racer and Milwaukee only having one race, but whatever. It is what it is. I'll say this about Snap-on. I met some of their marketing folks, and they're really with it. They like this stuff a lot. They pay attention, and I think it's no surprise that Snap-on jumped on to the Milwaukee race because I think they got a lot of racers there. Makes a lot of sense that they said, yeah, we like what we're seeing at Milwaukee. I liked what I was seeing too at Milwaukee. Okay, the Milwaukee palate cleanser's out of the way. I got to think about that race. I loved everything about Milwaukee last year. Now we get to talk about this. Okay, Marshall Pruitt, racer, had this broken. It's been going around for a while, but this was obviously the first time it had really been made public. IndyCar has set a new car leadership structure. And that means that Mark Miles has been appointed as one of the two new directors of the future chassis and engine formula. The other is Rick Shearing, the COO of Penske Automotive Group. Now, that two-man team was already in place. The third man on that team was supposed to be IndyCar president Jay Fry. Of course, Jay Fry has been now fired from the company, and Doug Bowles is in his place. And of course, Doug Bowles is now taking over. And, to Mark Miles' credit, and I'm going to say this because of what I'm about to say next, Mark has never claimed to be a racing guy, right? Never been claiming to be super, super knowledgeable about race cars or what they need or formulas XYZ. And this quote right here: "I haven't done this before. I'm not leading this," says Miles, which is interesting because this article says that he's one of the two people in charge of the new car project, but whatever. "I'm observing and trying to ask the right questions and making sure our key stakeholders are involved." On the surface, that's good. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, because I think what Miles is trying to say here is I think Mark wants to be a liaison between like the manufacturers who are currently involved in IndyCar, Chevy, Honda, etc., the team owners, etc., right? Dallara, Firestone. But that sounds a lot like Mark Miles isn't necessarily going in. And again, I wouldn't expect that he would have like a vision or an understanding of like, this is what I want the chassis and engine formula to go. It's more like he's going to be walking into Dallara ordering a new car like he's ordering a pizza or ordering a new appliance, right? You go to Sears and you order a microwave. You're not thinking about how that microwave was designed or how it's innovative or how it's going to be marketed. You just go in there and you go and get a microwave. Well, I think that's would be, and again, not blaming him. I understand. Like if someone tried to tell me to order an airplane, I would go into the airplane dealership and go, uh, one plane, please. I just wouldn't know. So I understand that, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of criticism about that. There's already been some talk about, folks behind the scenes not happy about this particular choice. I guess I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second with this team running the new chassis formula, which again, I should say this because I'm not the only one that's saying this. There are others in the media that are saying this. I've heard very similar things, which is the number that it sounds like they're shooting for, or the year that they're shooting for now, is not 2027, starting to sound like 2028. So we're already off to a real bad start. Okay, real bad start in terms of trying to get this chassis and engine formula off the ground. I mean, it needs to be done sooner rather than later, in my opinion. And it sounds like it's going to be done later. And, if you're trying to execute 2025 thinking in 2028, you're already going to be 3 years behind the trends in auto racing and the trends in the automotive industry. That's what's so hard about having a spec formula be spec for this long, is that if you're trying to attract manufacturers, you're kind of in a losing scenario. You need to have the rules evolving and changing, in my opinion, a lot more often to be able to get those manufacturers interested and invested. And if you're not doing that, you end up in the situation that we're in right now, which is there's not a lot of manufacturer interest, and we're really starting to hear a lot more about Honda maybe being out the door, maybe headed to NASCAR, maybe expanding their GTP program both here and abroad. Those are the sort of things that really start to worry me, because if you're talking about like Honda leaving doesn't just mean, well, I guess it's a spec engine now. Oops. Yeah, that sucks. But if Honda leaves, you lose race sponsorship, you lose team subsidies, you lose ad buys on Fox. It potentially pulls the last Jenga block out of the series and just makes the whole thing tumble down. And I don't want to mean to be an alarmist there. That's the reality. And I guarantee you that's stuff that's being talked about behind closed doors, right? Whether they want to acknowledge that that's a problem or not, that's up for debate. But that's a very real problem right now with IndyCar. So back to the devil's advocate part. When, if you're Roger Penske and you're putting together this team, what my interpretation of Team Penske has always been, and I think it's right, and it's honestly an admirable trait that Roger Penske possesses. I actually do feel that it is a good thing that he does, which is that loyalty is rewarded. And if you are a good company man, you're going to be put in positions of trust. And clearly, for whatever reason, Mark Miles has earned that trust of Roger Penske. So in a lot of ways, Roger Penske is, using Mark Miles, in my opinion, kind of as a surrogate here on this committee to put this project together. Roger trusts Mark to oversee the project, not necessarily to be hands-on day-to-day, making those decisions, but just be able to essentially, I think, report to Roger, right? Doesn't that make sense? Makes a lot of sense to me. Now, the appointment of Rich Shearing, the COO of Penske Automotive Group. So a road car guy isn't necessarily going to have the race car background, right? Okay, that's concerning. Let's not beat around the bush. Let's make no bones about that. That's concerning. I think the logic here, if I was looking for logic, again, I'm being very charitable here, is that if you go, put it this way, Penske Automotive Group is one of the biggest car dealers in the country. I think it is one of the biggest car dealers in the country, if not the world. Rich Shearing does business with virtually every manufacturer in the world. So if Roger Penske has identified that he has a problem with bringing manufacturers into this series, perhaps Rich Shearing is the liaison to go to those manufacturers who he does business with on the automotive side and say, hey, what can we do? What does this formula need to be for you guys to come and play in our playground? Could that be what Rich Shearing is bringing to this committee? Again, I'm giving a very charitable interpretation here, but that's the only thing that my brain can kind of logically place the wires together and say, this is the only way this makes any kind of sense, is that you're putting a road car guy in there because he is the guy who is in charge of trying to attract new manufacturers and set up a system, or at least listen to them to set up a system to try to attract them with the new formula. Doug Bowles. Now, what's interesting is that Marshall points out in this article correctly, but I'm not as worried about Doug Bowles as I am worried about Miles or Shearing. And I'll tell you why. Doug Bowles was a team owner. He was a team owner with Team Penske. Obviously, he's been in charge of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for years and years. Doug Bowles is a race fan first, and that means you essentially, to me, Doug Bowles is a race fan in the room, which is good because while I probably couldn't, like, for example, me, right? I'm a race fan. You're a race fan. You probably could sit in a room with these folks if you were invited in, right? And say, here's a general, like, direction I would like to see our rule set go in for IndyCar. This is what I would like to see. This is how I would like it to sound. This is how affordable it needs to be. This is XYZ. You could name all of those things. You could point to other series and go, well, in World Endurance Championship and IMSA, they have a common formula and they have torque sensors and they do BOP, but you could also do it a different way. And, we could continue to do it the way we do it, which is, pretty, tightly regulated, but also not fully regulated competition between the manufacturers. Or we could do what Formula One does and just completely take the reins off and let it eat. And if somebody, completely blows the field away, they completely blows the field away. But Doug Bowles is one of those people who understands racing and doesn't just understand IndyCar. He understands the broad global motorsport scene, at least in the sense of a race fan. So at least Doug will be able to make suggestions that come from an educated standpoint of having been a team owner, having been a race fan, having been a promoter, speaking to the fans, understanding what they want, understanding what a team owner wants, understanding what a driver wants. All of those sort of things come with Doug. So I'm least concerned about Doug, but my initial reaction to this was, what are they doing? My second reaction was, I don't understand what they're doing. My third reaction, as I put more thought into it, is I see what they're trying to do. I'm struggling to see the vision. And I think that's what it comes down to ultimately here. Because I think racing series that are able to welcome in new manufacturers have a vision and a goal that their formula is trying to achieve, right? For example, World Endurance Championship. We can talk about GTP and hypercar and all that stuff. But between those two rule sets, which come together to form the combined sports car prototype racing that we know, the goal of the racing, or the formula, I guess you could say, is you have a limited amount of virtual energy, and you have a maximum amount of aero you can use, and a maximum amount of weight, and a minimum. Maximum minimum amount of aero, maximum minimum amount of weight. But if you hit anything within that target, you can build the car and come race, right? Very, very broad rules, but a very specific goal. What is IndyCar trying to be? Because I think that's one of the biggest hurdles for a manufacturer that wants to come into IndyCar and be a part of this. What are we trying to accomplish? What, as a manufacturer, am I able to promote? Let's make it very simple. Aston Martin comes into World Endurance Championship. They run this. They start their race weekend or they start their series this weekend in Qatar. Aston Martin coming in. What is Aston Martin marketing? Hey, we've got the best sounding car. It's a non-hybrid. It's a V12. You guys are going to love it. But there are different goals. Peugeot has a car that looks like a spaceship. At one point, it was designed without a rear wing. They promote that car as like otherworldly. Look at how different we are. Toyota, very much on like the, hey, we're green. Look how eco-friendly we are. Porsche, kind of similar in that marketing sense. Ferrari, we're just going to build the fastest race car we can. Many other manufacturers like that. Cadillac, they market the fact that the car goes out of the pits quiet and goes boom when it fires up the internal combustion engine. It's small things. But what is what can Honda, like right now, what can Honda promote in IndyCar? Right? What right now can Chevy promote in IndyCar from a technological standpoint? It's tough to answer, isn't it? They're probably having the same questions there. And they're also involved in sports cars right now. In fact, Honda's using an engine that they plan to use in IndyCar in sports cars. What I would like to see, to tie this all up, is IndyCar establish first what the challenge is of IndyCar racing. What is the end goal of our rules? Once they establish that, then you must determine whether or not you even want to have manufacturers anymore. I'll say this. If Honda does leave and it's all Ilmores, you've already essentially lost all the manufacturer money anyway. I'd say adopt a sprint car model and go back to IRL style engines. I don't care how bad they sound at this point. They'll at least be loud, I guess, and they'll be cheap. Or go completely the opposite direction. Go full hog. Go completely insane with development. But you got to do something. You've got to come up with some sort of an ideology for this formula, and you've got to execute it. And I don't have a lot of confidence in it right now. I just don't have a lot of confidence in it right now. It makes me sad because I love this series. I want to see it succeed. And it disappoints me that the cars are going to be the same for this long. I don't know. Positivity later this week. We'll put it that way. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you on Unverified on the DL500 Club and live here on this channel for FP1 in St. Petersburg. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.